The opinions expressed are those of the host. The material is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute investment advice, and it is not intended as an endorsement for any specific investment. Visit crestmontpw.com for more details.
Welcome to the Ascent. This is Sam McGee, CEO and owner of Crestmont Private Wealth. We have an office in Houston, Texas, and Boerne, Texas. And today we're going to be talking about behavioral finance biases, risk tolerance, and investing at a market top or investing during a bull market. We have our usual guest and my longtime colleague, Alec Walker, CFP and EVP of Financial Planning out of our Houston office. Welcome to the show, Alec.
Hey, Sam. Happy to be here again. Yeah, I think this is it's going to be an interesting topic. You know, we've been having our investment committee meeting a couple weeks ago. We had a follow-up to that today. And it's just, you know, kind of heavily in the news right now is, are we at a bubble related to AI? Is this the 2000s all over again? And so we've been having discussions with clients and internally, and I thought it was a good time to just kind of talk about some of the behavioral finance side of things as it relates to biases as an investor, you know, thinking about your risk tolerance as it relates to your financial plan, and maybe share some key data points, you know, just about investing in a bull market or at an all-time high and what that looks like. And I know from your, you know, CFA curriculum studies, investment biases is one of your favorite topics and things to discuss. Yeah,
it reminds me of, you know, is now a good time to buy a home? Is now a good time to do this? And, you know, there's never a simple silver bullet answer, but we can really get caught up in our own kind of what I call, it's not a word, but perfectifying, trying to hit the nail on the head and get it exactly right and be the big winner. And that's tough in most things. So, yeah, this is a really good topic.
Yeah. So I guess I'll kind of start off with one of the first biases is loss aversion. And what loss aversion is that investors feeling the pain of losses about twice as strongly as the pleasure of equivalent gains. So, you know, the pain of losing $100 hurts twice as much as the pleasure of winning or gaining $100. And with where we are in kind of the current market environment, I think just from an anchoring perspective as well, which anchoring bias is another one, you know, fixating on a relative price point, is we see that we're at these high valuations, we're near these all-time highs, and we see, you know, just where the market was 6 months ago. The market was down 20% during the height of the tariff uncertainty. It's easy for us to look back and see that in the rearview mirror, but it's hard to forecast what things could look like 12 months, 24 months, 5 years from now in the future. Investors can kind of feel the pain of, oh, I could lose what we've earned so far. And that's going to be much more painful than what our gains could be in the future.
Yeah, it makes me think of just back to days of coaching Little League Baseball, which is not that long ago, and how some kids would be so overly focused and distraught by striking out twice in a game, but they forgot they had a double and a triple. You know, I try to remind them, hey, you get a double and a triple, strike out twice in Major League Baseball, you're a multi-millionaire. So I do think it is about how things are framed and also how people can think and perceive things. Maybe people around here might know a lot about.
Yeah, and just a funny, probably get a laugh if my parents are listening to this episode. Baseball player growing up as well, but especially my younger, I may have been one of those kids that really did not like to get out. So I'm sure my parents remember seeing those moments on the ball field growing up. So just kind of where we are, you know, kind of investing in a bull market. A lot of people, like I said, think that, okay, we're at an all-time high. The probability is that the market's going to go down. So I'm just going to wait it out. I don't want to experience that loss. I'm going to wait until the market corrects. And then at that time, I'll kind of get in. I'll have some control over it at that point. And that's another bias, is that illusion of control, you know, believing that you can kind of influence the outcomes of your investments by maybe the timing of when you get in or when you get out. Or, you know, we know a lot of folks that maybe work for publicly traded companies that think they have some extra insight into the price of their stock, which is not always the case. But going back since 1926, when the S&P 500 hits an all-time high, the forward 12-month return of the stock market is 13.7%. That's compared to after any other month that ended at any level, an all-time high, a low, a median, the market was up 12.5%. So historically, months ending in an all-time high lead to above average returns over the next 12 months. And I think that's just another piece of evidence. Historically, bear markets are much shorter than bull markets. And where we are in this current market cycle, we obviously had that correction earlier this year. The market kind of bottomed in October of 2022. So we're going on about 3 years of this bull market since that bottom. And historically speaking, there could still be opportunity for continuation of this cycle.
Yeah, and I think another thing just to consider, and obviously what you're talking about is historical, so there's no forward-looking guarantee that anything is going to happen just because things happen historically. But I think we have to look at what has gone on in the past to give a somewhat reliable indication of what could happen in the future. And I do know that when the dot-com bubble happened in early 2000, and you referenced that earlier, it was a little different. The internet had really come out as this new huge technology and ways for companies to do well in e-commerce, and everything seemed to go up that had technology tied to it. Now what's happening is kind of different. I mean, what we've got is a whole different level of technology that creates efficiency. Artificial intelligence is something that's used. I mean, shoot, we talked about this earlier, Alec. How many times in a day do we use it? I mean, we use it a lot already, and it's relatively new. And so I do think this is a little bit different than the early 2000s. But another thing you said was, hey, you can't predict when the market's going to tank or bottom or correct. And there have been a lot of downward cycles in there. Get back to this whole predicting the future and control bias. I mean, what kind of advice would you be giving someone who, is one of those people, who's, I'm going to get in when it bottoms out, or when I have this certain sign, I'm going to start investing. What are some ways to navigate that as an advisor?
Yeah, well, I think one thing, like you were mentioning, just because it may be, the past is similar to the past, but it's not going to necessarily predict the future. That's kind of where looking at someone's risk tolerance in tandem with their financial plan comes into play, because we know historically that the stock market has averaged a 10% rate of return. And when we're kind of building those projected returns into our long-term financial plan projections, whether it's an 8 to 10% rate of return, well, the market has only been close to that long-term average 6 times since 1926. So that means there's going to be big years where the market's up as high as 54% or down 43%. So that's kind of the range of outcomes. And some people can't handle that level of volatility. So that's where we kind of use not only the qualitative, getting to know their situation, but also some quantitative risk tolerance questionnaires where we look at somebody's risk tolerance, which is their ability to handle that volatility, their risk willingness, which is kind of their emotional, how they handle general pressure and stresses, not just related to finance, as well as their risk ability. And so someone's ability for risk is obviously going to be related to maybe their amount of savings, their time horizon, their income, their need for guaranteed income. How long do they expect to remain invested in the stock market? Those types of things where we look at maybe calibrating a portfolio so that somebody isn't set up in a position to where the whims of the market, we call that the systemic risk, isn't going to greatly ruin their plan and make them kind of make that mistake at the wrong time, as we say.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and we've had a few cases of that in the past, Alec. We've worked with clients together now for, a dozen years, and we've run into numerous cases where the temperament is tested and the willingness is tested when you have a 2022. And so having people think through the frame of mind of risk when things are going really well is really important. You and I talk about this all the time, how our phone may not ring as much during really good years as it does during bad years. Back to your point of that feeling of needing to do something when things aren't going well. But this is a great time to evaluate risk. Wouldn't you agree?
this is a perfect time. I think it's a great time to look at your portfolio. Obviously be pleased with the positive returns and growth, but also recognize that there are still risks. And usually the risks that are coming are the ones that we're not projecting. And just one final thing on that risk tolerance versus risk willingness, using a great example from a longtime client. He, with our risk questionnaire, scored very low on the risk tolerance, meaning, doesn't like to see the movements of the portfolio too much. And he's always kind of been one of the first people when things are happening in the news that we have a phone call. But to his credit, his risk willingness is actually pretty high, meaning that he can, as we talk through things and we review his plan and we review why we're invested, he's never made that drastic change. And he's stuck with, using strategies like diversification, dollar cost averaging, been able to stick with it. And that's, again, where the value of an advisor comes into play. That's the behavioral finance, the behavioral coaching piece.
Yeah, it sounds similar to my willingness to do something maybe difficult, like a surgery or something, maybe on my left shoulder potentially. I just gotta talk to the right guy and get the right advice, and I'm willing to do it. I don't like it, but I'm willing to do it. So, yeah.
Well, and I think back to our trip to Colorado where we got out of the office doing some hiking. We also worked in some downhill mountain biking in there as well. And I think you've got a little bit of a willingness to let your hand off the brake a bit, where I may be more comfortable on our investment strategy of pumping that brake a bit more as we're taking those curves. And that's just, some investors may want to pump the brakes a bit more than others.
All right, but let's be clear here, Alec. You did get further up the 14er than me. So anyway, yeah, very, very good analogies. Very good. Yeah, and if you're here locally, here in Bernie, we actually have an advertisement that shows that hike with Alec kind of taking a look in the distance. Very cool. So, Alec, I think that's all we have time for today. But thank you for sharing your wisdom. And if someone wanted to review their portfolio with you and talk more about our services, how would they reach you?
Yeah, they can reach me at alec@crestmontpw.com and be happy to set up a call with them.
Excellent. Have a great weekend and God bless.